Before you take a breath, I need you to understand one thing. The man holding that camera, the man running through those yellow hallways screaming for help, he never fell through the floor of reality. He never dropped into another dimension. Right now, at this very second, while you watch that shaking footage, his physical body is lying still, motionless, wasting away in a hospital bed that smells like antiseptic and like the end. His chest rising and falling only because a machine forces it to. And everything you are about to see is not a supernatural escape. It is the final transmission of a brain that is dying from the inside. Welcome to Fractured Plot. Close the door, because we are about to walk into a place that no one ever truly walked out of. The Backrooms sold you a comfortable lie, a cozy little lie. The idea that there is an error in the physics of the world, a glitch, a bug in the simulation, and that all it takes is one wrong step in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you slip through the wall and fall into an infinite maze of empty rooms. They call it no clipping, that glitch where a character passes through solid geometry and falls into the void behind the scenery. And this is where I need to shatter your illusion in the very first seconds, because the truth is infinitely more terrifying than any parallel dimension. No clipping does not exist in concrete. It exists inside your skull. What you call passing through the wall of reality, neurology calls a severe dissociative fracture. It is the exact, clinical, documented moment when consciousness peels away from the body during a catastrophic trauma, a violent blow to the head, a blood vessel bursting in the brain, a clot cutting off the oxygen. The blood stops reaching certain regions, and the mind, terrified, does the only thing it knows how to do in the face of the end. It runs, it shuts off, it rips itself free from the body like an anchor torn from a sinking ship. And that sensation of falling through the floor, of plummeting through layer after layer of yellow space, is not you traveling to another world. It is your sense of identity disintegrating while your real body collapses onto a real floor. Think about that. That very first frame of the footage, the moment of the no-clip, is the moment the protagonist is passing out in real life. It is the instant his skull cracks against the ground, or his artery ruptures and his body drops, except the camera of his mind keeps rolling. And that camera is exactly what you are watching right now. Let me explain how this mechanism works from the inside, because the neurology of dissociation is one of the most frightening things science has ever mapped. When the human body suffers a trauma, it reads as fatal. When the pain is too great, when the terror is too much to survive, the brain has an emergency switch. A last resort circuit breaker. It disconnects consciousness from the physical experience. It is an ancient defense mechanism, older than language, older than reason. It is the same thing that makes the prey stop feeling pain in the jaws of the predator. The brain floods the system with chemicals that switch off the perception of the body, and the mind floats away. Survivors of horrific accidents report this constantly. They say they saw their own body from the outside. They felt like they were falling, floating, peeling away. They say the world went distant, unreal, as if they were watching their own life through fogged glass. This has a name. It is called depersonalization. It is called derealization. And it is exactly the feeling that kicks off the entire journey into the Backrooms. That first instant when the ground vanishes beneath his feet and the protagonist plunges downward. That is his consciousness detaching from a body that has just suffered fatal damage. The no-clip is depersonalization caught on film. It is the soul being torn from the flesh in slow motion, and the brain, not understanding what is happening, translates that tearing into a physical fall through the floor. Because the mind needs a story. The mind cannot accept pure chaos, so it takes the abstract horror of its own death and turns it into a narrative it can process. I fell. I passed through. I am somewhere else. It is more bearable to believe that than to accept the truth, which is, I am dying, and this is my mind coming apart. Look at the language the material itself uses. They say that whoever falls into the Backrooms is no clipping through reality. But people who have been close to death, people who survived cardiac arrest, people who went through a brain trauma and came back to tell the tale, describe the exact same thing, the feeling of coming loose, the feeling that the walls of the world went thin as wet paper and you simply slid through them. There is no portal. There is only the instant when the brain loses the ability to sustain the coherent illusion we call ordinary life. And when that illusion falls, what is left underneath? What lives behind the wallpaper of our perception? It is exactly what the protagonist finds. The void, the yellow, the hum. The backrooms are not the place you go when you die. The backrooms are the place your mind hides while it is dying. It is the waiting room of consciousness. And the cruelest part of all is that in this waiting room, the clock never moves. And I need you to feel the weight of that sentence, because time is the quietest and the most devastating of all the torturers inside the backrooms. Out there, in the real world, maybe only a minute passes. A single minute between the moment the body collapses and the moment brain death is declared. But in there, time stretches in a monstrous way. The brain, stripped of the external markers we use to measure the passing of hours, with no sunrise and no sunset, no clock, no hunger, no bodily fatigue, loses its temporal anchor completely. And 1 second can become an hour can become a year. A single minute of brain death can be lived, from the inside, as decades of wandering through yellow hallways. It is the same distortion that makes a dream of a few seconds feel like an entire lifetime when you wake. Except here, there is no waking. Think about the raw horror of that. The protagonist may be trapped in that maze for a stretch of subjective time our human minds cannot even conceive of, while his family, standing at the bedside, waits only a few agonizing minutes. He is living out an eternity of solitude. He grows old inside his own head. He goes mad slowly, at his own private pace of centuries. And when the doctors finally switch off the machines, for them maybe 20 minutes of effort have passed. For him, 1,000 lifetimes of torment have gone by. This is the cruelest asymmetry of death. What is an instant for those who stay behind can be a life sentence for the one who leaves. Now I want you to pay attention to the architecture of this place, because every single detail is a clinical signature. Level 0, the infinite yellow. The old carpet, grimy, damp, with that smell of mildew soaked deep into it. The fluorescent lights buzzing without end. That 60 hertz hum that gnaws at your nerves, that drills into your eardrum from the inside. The identical walls, the rooms that repeat. You walk and walk and walk, and nothing changes. It is the same hallway. It is the same stained yellow wall. It is the same flickering light in the ceiling. And people look at this and think it is horror design. It is nostalgia aesthetics. It is that discomfort of a familiar but wrong place. But I see something else. I see the perfect, exact, surgical description of what happens to the human brain in extreme sensory deprivation. Let me explain what science has already proven. When you take away the brain's external stimuli, when there is no changing light, no new sound, no touch, no smell, no time, the brain does not shut down. The brain panics. It was built by millions of years of evolution to process information constantly. That is what it does. It is the only thing it knows how to do. So when you place it in an absolute void, when you lock it in the dark and the silence, or worse, when the body slips into a coma and no real signal reaches it at all, the brain does something desperate. It begins to manufacture reality. It begins to hallucinate. It takes the scraps of memory it still has, the fragments of places it once saw, and it builds a set, a minimal set, repetitive, cheap, because a dying brain has no energy to build cathedrals. It builds the bare minimum needed to avoid facing the absolute nothing. And what is the bare minimum? A room, a wall, a light. And because it has no energy to create variety, it copies, it repeats, it makes the same room infinite times. That is why the backrooms are endless and identical. Not because the space is vast, but because the imagination of the dying is poor. It is the same scrap of dream, looped over and over until the end. And this is not loose theory. This is documented experiment, proven, repeated in laboratories dozens of times. There is a phenomenon called the Ganzfeld effect. Researchers take a healthy person, sane, with a perfectly intact mind, and they strip away all sensory information. They cover the eyes with halved ping pong balls. They bathe the vision in a uniform, formless light. They pipe constant white noise into the ears. That is all. Just uniform emptiness. And what happens to this sane person? Within minutes, their brain, starving for stimulation, begins to invent. They start seeing things that are not there. Shapes, faces, movement in the corner of the eye. They begin to hear voices, footsteps, whispers. Mentally healthy people, within a few minutes of sensory void, begin to hallucinate in a vivid and terrifying way. Now I want you to imagine not minutes, but days, weeks, subjective years of absolute void inside a coma. If a healthy brain collapses into hallucination within 15 minutes of deprivation, what is left of a traumatized brain after an eternity in there? The backrooms are the Ganzfeld effect, pushed to its terminal extreme. They are what the human mind produces when you lock it in the nothing and throw away the key. The shapes moving in the hallways, the sounds coming from nowhere, the constant feeling that something is right behind you. All of it is the panicking brain filling the silence with ghosts. Except in a coma, these ghosts do not go away when you remove the blindfold, because there is no blindfold to remove. The experiment never ends, and there is one more layer to this, one that neuroscientists only understood recently. There is a network in the brain called the default mode network. It is the network that lights up when you are doing nothing, when you are lying with your eyes closed, just thinking, drifting, daydreaming. It is the network that builds your sense of self, your internal narrative, the voice inside your head. Normally, it is kept balanced, kept in check by the stimuli of the real world coming in through the senses. But when you cut the senses, when the external world disappears, that network runs with no brakes. It fires out of control. It begins to generate entire worlds out of nothing, with no contact with reality to correct it. The backrooms are the protagonist's default mode network, running wild, unanchored, fabricating a whole universe from the rubble of his own memory. It is your own inner voice becoming your jailer. It is the wandering of the mind turning into a cell with no visible walls. And here is the detail that truly keeps me awake at night. When surgeons perform certain operations, when they place a patient under deep anesthesia, there are rare and horrifying cases where the mind does not fully go under. The body is paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream, unable to signal. But somewhere in there, a flicker of awareness remains, trapped, silent, screaming into a void that no one on the outside can hear. The backrooms are that horror stretched into infinity. A consciousness locked inside a body that cannot answer, cannot move, cannot be reached. Screaming down hallways that only exist inside a skull. And the most unbearable thought of all is that the people at the bedside, the ones who love him, have no idea. They see a peaceful, sleeping face. They see stillness. They think at least he is not suffering, when the truth may be that he is running, right now, through endless yellow corridors, more terrified and more alone than any living person has ever been. And the most frightening part is that this network, this generator of inner reality, is the very same thing that makes you you. It is where your sense of identity lives. So when it begins to degrade, when it begins to glitch, to repeat, to forget, it is not only the scenery that crumbles, it is the protagonist himself. He is being erased by the same machine that is keeping him conscious. He is prisoner and prison at the very same time. The yellow is not a color chosen by accident. Yellow is the color the optic nerve produces when it receives no real light. When you shut your eyes tight in the dark and see those blotches, those phosphenes floating, many of them carry a yellowish, greenish, sickly tone. It is the brain inventing light because it has no light. The backrooms are drenched in that color because they are made of the darkness behind your closed eyes, turned into a ceiling. And the hum, that constant buzzing of the lamps, that is what we call tinnitus, the phantom sound the brain creates when the silence is so total it becomes unbearable. A patient in a deep coma, in a silent room, isolated from everything. The brain fills that silence with an eternal hum. The lights of the backrooms do not buzz because they are old. They buzz because that is the sound of the void inside a skull that is switching off. It is the last noise of the machine before it powers down for good. And the smell. That smell of damp carpet, of mildew, of standing water. Do you know what that is? Smell is the most primitive sense we have, the one most tied to our deepest memory. When the brain begins to shut down its higher functions, when it loses logic, language, reason, the old olfactory memories are among the last to fade. And what smell does the dying mind conjure? A smell of abandonment, a smell of a basement, a smell of a forgotten place where no one has lived for a long time. Because that is exactly what his mind has become, an abandoned place, a body where consciousness no longer properly lives. The backrooms smell of mildew because they are the ruin of a person. They are the wreckage of somebody's soul, papered over in yellow wallpaper. It is the panic room of the human mind. It is the last cell where the protagonist's identity is being slowly scraped away, layer by layer, by the pure madness of isolation. And every step he takes down that hallway is a step deeper into his own forgetting. He is not searching for the exit. He is losing himself inside himself. And there is no map for that. And it is here, at this point, that I need to stop for a second, because this thought suffocates me every single time. If the worst maze in the world is not in another dimension, if it is inside our own skull, then none of us is truly safe. Your mind, this very mind that is listening to me right now, is capable of becoming your most absolute prison. And that is exactly why I need to thank, from the bottom of my heart, the members of the Fractured Plot channel. You who support these dark analyses. You who descend with me into the places no one wants to look at directly. You are the rope that keeps me anchored while I explore the abyss. From the core of who I am, thank you. Without you, these journeys into the depths of the human mind would not exist. You are the light left burning outside while I walk into the dark. And if you have made it this far, if you too have felt the unbearable hum of those yellow lights inside your mind, do not let your sanity get lost in the hallways. Anchor your reality here by leaving your like, subscribe to Fractured Plot so you never wander alone in the dark. And tell me in the comments if you have ever felt, even for a single second, that horrible sensation of being trapped inside your own mind. Because trust me, you are not the only one. And we are going to need to stay together for what comes next. Because now we need to talk about them. The entities, the monsters. Those things that hunt in the hallways, made of wires, of hair, of giant bacteria, of twisted flesh and impossible sounds. The classic terror of the backrooms. And I know you see them as aliens, as demons, as creatures from another dimension that inhabit that place. But I need to completely change your perception of what these things really are. Because they do not come from outside. They come from within. They are human. Or rather, they used to be human. Pay attention to this, because it is the most disturbing idea I have ever built for this channel. There is a concept in psychiatry and in the philosophy of mind called ego death. It is the moment when a person's identity dissolves completely. When the memory erases, when the name disappears, when the life story vanishes, when everything that made you simply ceases to exist. And what is left when the ego dies? What is left is the organism, the flesh, the pure instinct, animal, primal, soulless, without consciousness, without a past. What is left is hunger. What is left is fear. What is left is the blind drive to chase movement and sound. The entities of the backrooms are exactly that. They are what remains of other patients, other consciousnesses that fell into the same maze, the same coma, the same void, and stayed there too long, so long that their minds burned out completely. The identity evaporated, the humanity switched off, and what was left was this thing, this heap of nameless instinct, wandering the hallways of its own madness, reduced to the rawest and most primitive of existences. And look at what a disturbing detail their very appearance reveals. Why are these entities made of wires, of hair, of bacteria, of shapeless piled-up things? Because that is how a destroyed mind remembers a human being. Think of a person with terminal dementia, with a brain so damaged that they no longer recognize their own children. When they look at a human face, they no longer see a face. They see a confusion, a mass of features that no longer organizes into meaning. Facial recognition is one of the most sophisticated functions of the brain, and it is one of the first to break when the mind collapses. So inside the backrooms, when a ruined brain tries to represent another human being lost in there, it can no longer assemble a face. It can no longer assemble a coherent human body. It assembles what it can: wires, hair, textures, fragments. A grotesque, failed approximation of the human form, because whoever is imagining these creatures has already lost the ability to properly imagine a human being. The entities are horrifying, not because they are monstrous by nature, but because they are humans seen through the eyes of a mind that has forgotten what a human is. They are our reflection in a mirror shattered by madness, and that is infinitely sadder than any alien monster could ever be. Think about the cruelty of that idea. That creature chasing the protagonist, that monster of wires and teeth. It was once a person. It had a name. It had a mother. It had fears, dreams, a job, a love. And then that person suffered the same trauma, fell into the same coma, was thrown into the same yellow maze, and got lost in there for months, for years, in the distorted perception of that place where time does not pass, maybe for subjective centuries, until the last drop of humanity drained down the drain, until it forgot its own name, and then it became that. And that is why those things look so lost, so wrong, so made of pieces. Because they are pieces. They are the remains of a person the mind forgot how to assemble. They are living proof of what isolation does to the human soul when it lasts forever. And now comes the part that freezes the blood. What does it truly mean to be caught by an entity? Fiction makes you believe it is death, that the creature reaches you, devours you, and it is over. But no, being caught is not being devoured. Being caught means becoming one of them. It means you stayed too long, that you grew too tired, that your identity finally gave way, and that now you too have crossed the line of ego death. That moment when the creature reaches the protagonist is not the moment he dies. It is the moment he forgets who he is. It is the last drop of his sanity draining away. It is the instant he stops being a person lost in the maze and becomes another part of the maze, another monster, another beacon of pure instinct hunting the next ones who will fall in there. That is why there are so many entities. Each one of them was once someone like the protagonist, screaming for help in the hallways. Each monster is a tombstone. Each roar is the echo of a name forgotten forever. And the protagonist, running from those things, is running from his own future. He is fleeing what he will inevitably become if he stays there too long. He is not being hunted by monsters. He is being chased by what is left of a human being after the mind abandons it completely. And there is an even crueler thing hidden in this concept of ego death. In psychiatry, there are states where a person loses so much of themselves that they keep moving, walking, reacting, but there is no one home anymore. Doctors call these vegetative states, akinetic mutism, syndromes where the body works, but the person, the self, the subject, has simply evaporated. It is the body without its owner. It is the house with the lights on, but nobody living inside. The entities of the backrooms are that, raised to a nightmare. They are dream bodies still in motion, but completely emptied of any soul. And the protagonist, when he looks at them, is looking at the final state of his own condition. He is seeing the fate written on the wall. That thing there is what awaits everyone who falls into a deep coma and does not return. First, you are a terrified person running through the hallways, still remembering your own name. Then, you begin to forget. Then, you stop running. Then, you stop remembering why you were running. And one day, without even noticing, you become one of the things that hunt. You become the monster that terrifies the next newcomer. It is an assembly line for the death of the soul. And there is no way out through a door. There is only forward, step by step, toward total forgetting. And that is the greatest tragedy, because those creatures, in the deepest part of them, still feel something. A remnant, a shadow, a hunger even they do not understand. They hunt not because they are evil, but because they are alone in a way that we, with our minds still whole, could never begin to comprehend. They want company in the only way they still know. They want to drag someone else into the forgetting, so they are not alone in the void. It is the most horrible embrace there is. The embrace of someone who has already lost everything, offering you the same fate. Come, they say, without words, because they have already forgotten words. Come stay with me here in the dark. Come forget too. And the horror is that, after enough time in that place, a part of you wants to accept, just so the hum will stop, just so the yellow will disappear, just so you can, finally, rest from the unbearable weight of trying to remember who you were. But the protagonist has not given up yet. And here we reach the cruelest blow in this whole story. Hope, the exit, the doors. At some point, he finds signs of something else. Traces of a corporation, ASYNC, doors that seem to lead somewhere, cracks in the yellow wall that seem to promise a return to the real world. And his heart races, and the audience's heart races with him, because finally it seems there is a way out, that he is going to make it, that he is going to cross back over and wake up. And this is exactly where I need to be cruel with you, because there is no exit, there never was. That ASYNC, that mysterious corporation that seems to be exploring the backrooms, that seems to have mapped that place, that seems to be studying that dimension. They are not exploring another universe. Let me tell you what they really are. ASYNC is the representation of medicine itself, of the hospital machine, of the doctors, the devices, the protocols that are, in the real world, caring for the protagonist's comatose body. Every time he finds a sign of ASYNC inside the maze, it is because out there, in the hospital bed, someone is touching his body. A doctor adjusting a machine, a nurse changing an IV, a monitor beeping, an external stimulus penetrating the darkness of the coma and being interpreted by the imprisoned mind as a presence, a door, a clue, a hope. Think about how diabolically coherent this is. Everyone who has ever been in a coma and come back, everyone who spent days unconscious in a hospital bed, reports the same thing when they wake. They say they heard things, that there were voices far away, that they felt touches, presences, lights passing through their closed eyelids. The comatose brain is not fully switched off. It still catches fragments of the real world, distorted, filtered, transformed. And it weaves those fragments into the dream it is trapped in. A nurse holding the patient's hand becomes, in the dream, a creature grabbing you. The beep of a monitor becomes the hum of a lamp. The voice of a doctor becomes a whisper coming from behind a door. And the medical interventions, the attempts to bring the body back to life, those become the doors of ASYNC. They become cracks of light. They become the promise of an exit. ASYNC is not a sinister corporation exploring dimensions. ASYNC is the hospital itself, the medical effort itself, penetrating the darkness of the coma and being interpreted by a terrified mind as a mysterious system that sometimes helps and sometimes threatens. Because for the patient in a coma, medicine is exactly that. A powerful, invisible force that moves his body without him understanding why. That sometimes brings relief and sometimes brings pain. That opens doors and sometimes closes them forever. That moment when the protagonist thinks he has found a crack back into reality. That instant of relief, of light at the end of the tunnel, it is not the escape. It is his body reacting to an external medical stimulus. Maybe it is a resuscitation attempt. Maybe it is the paddles of the defibrillator touching his chest. Maybe it is the voice of a family member calling his name at the bedside, begging him to come back. And in there, in the maze, that manifests as a door opening, as a different light, as the promise that reality is still within reach. The brain feels the touch of life out there and creates a metaphor of hope. But it is a poisoned hope, because the body is already too weak. The damage is already too deep. And each rescue attempt out there, each shock, each call, each intervention, grows weaker and weaker. The doors grow rarer. The lights of ASYNC go out one by one. Because out there, the doctors are giving up. Because out there, the line on the monitor is going flatter and flatter. And then comes the end, the real end. That moment when so many Backrooms found footages stop. The protagonist, exhausted, broken, lost beyond any hope, finally finds the silence. The lights go out. The hum ceases. The yellow gives way to absolute black. And the audience reads this as peace, as escape, as if he had finally slipped out of the Backrooms, crossed to the other side, found rest. But I need to tell you the bitterest truth of them all. That silence is not the escape. That darkness is not freedom. That moment, when everything goes out, is the moment brain death is declared in real life. It is the instant the line on the heart monitor goes completely flat. It is the continuous tone of the machine, that long, endless beep, that in there manifests as the final silence. The lights of the Backrooms go out because the brain activity has ceased. The hum stops because there is no longer a brain to produce it. And the protagonist did not escape to anywhere. He was erased. And the most terrible, the most unbearable part of all is that this final darkness may not be the end of his consciousness. It may be the beginning of an eternal darkness. Because if the Backrooms were his mind fabricating a set so it would not have to face the void, what happens when even that is gone? What happens when the brain loses even the energy to create the yellow and the hum? All that is left is the dark. A dark with no walls, no time, no exit, without even the poor comfort of an infinite hallway. He is trapped there, in the absolute darkness of his own extinguished mind, with no body to wake into, with no dream to inhabit, just the nothing, aware of the nothing, forever. And that is why this story haunts me in a way no monster ever could, because it does not speak of a distant place we will never visit. It speaks of what exists inside every human skull. It speaks of what can happen to any one of us at any moment with a single car crash, a single clot, a single vein that bursts in the wrong place. The Backrooms are not science fiction. The Backrooms are a medical possibility. They are the map of a coma. They are the floor plan of the slow death of a human mind. And every time you look at that yellow wallpaper, at those buzzing lights, at those infinite hallways, you are not looking at another dimension. You are looking inward, at the deepest and darkest place there is. The only maze that no one, ever, found the exit to. The maze you are carrying right now, just behind your eyes. So, before I switch off these lights, I need to ask you one last thing. Leave your like if this theory shifted the way you see reality, if it changed the way you look at your own mind, and confirm your subscription to the channel before the lights go out for good, because at Fractured Plot, we do not run from the dark. We walk into it together, hand in hand, so that none of us has to face the hum of the void alone. Stay. Anchor yourself here, because as long as you can hear my voice, you still know who you are. And as long as you know who you are, the maze has not caught you yet. Breathe. You are still here. For now, you are still here.